All right, everyone, welcome. My name is Corinne Zaragoza Estrella. I am the Outreach Coordinator at the UNC-DUKE Consortium in Latin American Studies. Thank you so much for joining us today for our fourth panel of a virtual professional development week working with Latin American immigrants. Our session today is Nurturing Latinx Identity Formation in Learning Environments. And we are joined today, we have the, very excited to have with us Elaine Utin, the co-founder and co-executive director of Latinx Ed. And we're also joined by José Cisneros, the senior instructor coach at Latinx Ed as well. So we're gonna go through a few more housekeeping things, some notes, and then I will turn it over to Elaine and José. A couple of Zoom etiquette reminders. Please mute yourself during the presentation. I think most of you already are, but if you look at the bottom, there's a mute button there that you can click so that we're not distracted by other sounds. Also, to improve internet connectivity for all, please keep your video off to increase the audio visual for everyone who is joining us today. And if you have any questions, please use the chat box as the presentation continues. And then when it's time for the Q&A, we'll have a session, then we'll go over all the questions at that time as well. Some notes on the workshop. All sessions will be recorded and uploaded to the UNC-DUKE Consortium YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of this month. So if there is something that you thought was really valuable and you want to rewatch that, you'll be able to watch that as well. You can also share it with your colleagues who are unable to attend today so that they can get some of the expertise from Elaine and José through that means. And then the presentation PowerPoints will also be sent to participants afterwards. So if there's a link or something that you want to access or some notes that you want to take, we'll provide you with that presentation later. With that, I'm going to turn it over to José and Elaine.
Yeah, José can take over.
Yeah.
We're just going to do a little switcheroo with the slides.
Very.
Awesome.
Elaine, did you want to request?
Yes, I just did, yeah. All right, awesome. All right, well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. We're really excited to see some of your faces. I know some of us are behind the dark screens here, but feel free to drop in the chat. We'd love to know who is in this space with us as well. So if you could go ahead and introduce your name, your hometown, where you're coming from, your role, and also your why. So why you're here today. We'll leave a little bit of a buffer for people to kind of introduce themselves in the chat. So just again, a little heads up, or a little, again, introducing yourself, your why, and we'll get to see who is in this space. So we'll go ahead and wait for like a minute while people start kind of collecting their intros. Welcome, Pete, all the way coming from Michigan. Let's go. All right, Teresa, welcome. Mireya, hello. Awesome. Okay, this is so exciting. Oh, now I'm going to be so distracted by the chat. Okay, this is great. All right, keep it coming. I'm really excited to see where you're all coming from. And also feel free to see who else is in this space too, in case there's some connections to be made. So we're really excited to have you all here. So as you, hopefully you'll see some friends up in here as well. So this is going to be a fun kind of session today, real talk out the wazoo. It's going to get real and also soul searching too is our hopes. So we're going to go ahead, y'all keep coming, keep dropping your intros in the chat and we'll go ahead and kind of slide into our presentation to get started, but keep it coming. And José, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, everyone. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to be discussing today regarding our presentation, Nurturing Latinx Identity Formation in Learning Environments. We're going to be sharing a little bit about ourselves, who we are, our stories, our journeys. we'll be introducing our work with Latinx Ed, the organization we're representing. More specifically, the Somos Carolina program, from which you'll get a lot of insight and examples and recommendations of so far of how our program has helped us better nurture Latinx identity. We'll be discussing community cultural wealth and ways and you can implement this framework into whatever it is, wherever it is you're working, whether it's the school, an organization, or a program you're running. And along the way, but at the end as well, we'll be giving you recommendations that you can implement. Maybe you can remix them, make them your own so that they work with the community that you are working with directly. And then we'll have some time for reflections. There's gonna be a lot of different topics and themes discussed. So definitely having time to think about those themes and topics and reflecting on those is important. So we want to give space and time for that at the end as well.
Thanks, Jose. So we're going to start off with our introductions and kind of share with you who we are, where we're coming from. This is an important part of this presentation, actually, because you'll see a lot of who we are is embedded in our work and reflected in our work and kind of our experiences and our growth. So just naming that as we dive into introductions. Also, would love to invite you to drop a connection maybe that you have with us as you're hearing us share our story in the Zoom chat if you have anything in common. An example is like, my favorite food is ceviche. It's been ceviche since I was 5 years old. So if that too is yours, I'd like to know who else out here has that in common. So this is an example of something that you can drop in the chat, like me too, I'm this, I identify with that as well, or I've had that role before. So it's just a little example as we kind of dive into our introductions. But to start off with, I am a Latina immigrant from Peru. That is a huge part of my identity, a huge part of who I am that has shaped my whole life and all my experiences. I was born in Lima, Peru in particular, but came over to the South when I was really young, so about 2 years old, and was raised in the rural South in particular. So Georgia, Arkansas, Waxhaw, North Carolina in particular. And so growing up and being also, Peruvian, Peruana in predominantly white spaces was another really big part of my experience and journey, kind of growing up and figuring out who I was. Also being from very small towns in the country, like 2 stoplight kind of towns has been my experience. So yes, to all the Latinas and Latinos and Latinajis from rural areas, I'm here for that. And that's a large part of who I am. Also, I'm the oldest child of 6 kids. This is another really big role for me that I've played my whole life, and just kind of figuring out who I am and also how to navigate a lot of different systems for my family and for my siblings, in particular education, which leads into another role that an identity too that I carry is being a first-generation college student and figuring out what that path was for me in pursuing higher education, being the first in my family to figure out that path and to figure out if that was a good fit for me. So that was also quite a challenging experience, just not having the resources that I needed in my school to really figure out how to mobilize and how to make it to the next step. But I kind of joke a little bit about this, but it's very serious. By the grace of God, made it to college in many ways, also with the support of family, and was able to go to UNC Chapel Hill and study education, middle grades education in particular, and then headed off after a few years of working to grad school to start the first gen experience all over again, but at Harvard Graduate School of Education and study technology, innovation, and education. So education has very much been that thread throughout my whole life that has really tied things together. So yes, to all the middle school teachers out here. So I also am a teacher. That's another role. I've taught English actually in South Korea in particular, taught through Fulbright and taught English to an elementary ages in particular. And so that was a really huge experience for me, being able to kind of add a global perspective to education and thinking about how other cultures and countries are really influencing their formats and everything. The whole thing was really fascinating to see the differences, which now leads me in many ways to what I do now, being a leader and in this leadership role as the co-executive director, co-founder of a nonprofit organization called Latinx Ed. And so we are going to be talking more about Latinx Ed and kind of explaining more about our work, because a lot of what we have to share is demonstrated through what we're trying to do. So really excited to also see people jump in all the connections in the chat. Shout out to other people who are the oldest of 6 kids. Okay, that is we're out here. All right, so I'll turn it over to Jose, who will take it over.
All right, thank you, Elaine. So I'm José Cisneros. Again, if there's anything we share, any commonalities, feel free to drop it in the chat. Starting off, I'm also an immigrant. I'm from Mexico. I came when I was 5, undocumented family. So that played a huge, huge role in, I mean, it still does in my entire life here in the United States. And I grew up in Snow Hill, North Carolina, which is a tiny town. If you know where ECU is, or Greenville, North Carolina, it's south of it. People in Greenville don't know Snow Hill exists. So very, very rural. I think we have 1 stoplight. No, I think we do have more than that, but it's tiny. My high school is the only high school in the whole county. So that's how rural the whole area is. I'm a middle child, and I'm the only boy. So that, I think, just kind of like provided some unique experiences growing up in an immigrant family, being the only boy, the middle child. And like I mentioned, I'm undocumented, but after 2012, I was able to obtain DACA, which is a form of renewable legal status that was granted through executive action. And I'm also a first-generation college student. So those two things kind of went hand in hand regarding my college journey. And I went to UNC, I studied history, and I minored in education. And so after UNC, I became a teacher through Notre Dame's ACE Teaching Fellows Program. And I taught Spanish and social studies in Texas while I was studying my master's in education, which I completed a year ago, so fairly recently. And I think definitely education was always, I think, in the back of my mind in terms of what I wanted to do, but I was never exactly sure how. But I made up my mind that teaching was a great way to gain more insight into education, the system, issues relevant to education, impacting communities, specifically marginalized communities, Latinx community. And so being in Texas played, I think, a pivotal role in my decision to continue in education, but kind of shift gears and work with Latinx Ed. So I'm now the Somos Carolina program manager at Latinx Ed, which I'll be talking more in depth in a moment.
Thanks, Jose. So we're going to start off with sharing a little bit about what Latinx Ed is. Let's see, here we go. All right, so starting off with, we're an educational nonprofit organization. We're actually based in North Carolina, also in partnership with the School of Education at UNC Chapel Hill. And so our mission, which is very near and dear to us, is that we amplify the leadership and lived experiences of Latinx immigrant families to break down barriers to educational opportunities in North Carolina. And this is a very relevant mission, or at least we really are committed to this in particular, because as we're seeing the long span of shifting in our population in North Carolina in particular, just a few stats to drop from the Carolina Demography Center is that 370,000 Latinx children are in North Carolina right now. So that means that nearly 1 in 6 children right now, ages 0 to 17, are Latinx identifying. So in additional, what I found was really fascinating looking over those stats, as well as 93% are US born, which is fascinating and really also important when it comes to thinking about identity formation and how we are connecting to who we are as Latinos, Latinx, Hispanic, however you identify, or how your students identify. This culture and this history is extremely important. And so for us, we are passionate about uplifting these experiences and these journeys. And in particular, we take a three-prong approach through our pillars in particular, which we call the 3 L's, in how we approach this in our work. And so to start off with, we have Latinidad. So what does it mean to be Latino, Latinx, etc.? What does that look like? What does that mean? For us, knowing no history, no self is really a driving force behind Latinidad, ensuring that our young people have a critical understanding of their history so that they'll have a deeper understanding of themselves and who they are and their purpose, and also our community at large. So this is part of our dedication to making sure that students are developing a positive racial ethnic identity. Next is our learning in particular. So learning as the second pillar is also, I'm just going to go ahead and spoiler alert, leadership is our third L, but these are both learning, being a learner and being a leader are also roles that we get to play too. And so we're thinking about how do we take who we are as Latinos, Latinas, etc., and be able to apply the wealth of those experiences and that identity into our roles as leaders and learners in our community. And so as we unpack learning in particular, for us, we're extremely passionate about protecting the potential of our youth, in particular by creating and supporting environments that fully embrace students' identities and community and cultural wealth in particular. And with leadership in particular, as we're helping shape young Southern Latinx leaders on top of that, also thinking about how do we prioritize our growth and our well-being in order to be a part of serving and also cultivating thriving communities in North Carolina in particular. And so these are three different frameworks that are really spearheading our work and kind of the creation, the development of the programs that we run. And so we're going to be talking a little bit more about some of the initiatives that we have, but we actually wanted to kind of continue sharing a bit about our stories and kind of getting a little bit vulnerable with you all and explaining some of our own realities that Jose and I also faced in kind of growing up in North Carolina in particular, and then kind of bring it back to our organization in ways that we are also trying to innovate in this educational space as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started on talking about a few different pieces. And Jose and I share a lot in common, but our stories are a bit different. So we'll highlight those differences as well. But to start off with, part of our reality of being a learner in the South in particular too was not having any Latinx representation in our schools, whether that was in our leadership, school boards, to our teachers, administrators. And so that definitely painted part of our journey of not being able to relate, particularly culturally, to our leadership in particular as students. That being said, we had strong supports in our home via our family. I always have to acknowledge my mom and my abuelita as my teachers at the same time, even though we were in the private space. Like they were pivotal in me learning and figuring out who I was and trying to connect to my culture. We also faced lack of cultural representation in curriculum in particular. So not seeing ourselves represented in our textbooks, in history courses and courses at large, and not being able to really bring our identities into those learning spaces and think about who we were and how that was also impacting what we were learning, or even how we learned at the same time. And so that gap created gaps in our understanding of our own history, but also thinking about how we belonged in the communities within North Carolina. If I think, just to share a personal anecdote, growing up in Waxhaw, North Carolina, if anybody knows where Waxhaw is, okay, yes, Union County, we're out here. But growing up, I didn't really feel a part of Waxhaw. I can't say that I was really proud of being from Waxhaw. I couldn't really see how I fit in Waxhaw. I just knew I had, my family was there and I was growing up and trying to figure it out. But there wasn't a clear understanding of why my family and also my culture's representation in this community really mattered and was valued on top of that. And so there was a gap there of me figuring out how I, what it meant to be from Waxhaw, what it meant to be from North Carolina, and then ultimately what it meant to be, American or, and kind of from the space. So I'll turn it over to Jose to talk about being an immigrant.
So on top of the lack of representation, there were these negative perceptions of being immigrants, even though Elaine and I have very different stories of immigration. In the eyes, I think, of other people here in the US, especially rural parts, being an immigrant was just kind of being part of the same group to them. So there were very negative perceptions about who we were, why we came here, our language, our culture. And so navigating that was a whole journey, right? And again, the lack of representation, the negative perceptions, the sort of animosity, the negativity, really I I think, interfered with our ideas about who we were, or like what we wanted to be, or where we wanted to go. And in my case, obviously, like being undocumented, that just posed many more institutional systemic barriers in just trying to get to college with financial aid, in-state tuition. So that really marked our journeys. Additionally, there are all these navigational challenges, right? We're in this system where that it wasn't really created for people who are in these situations. They're not working for us. We have to navigate the different spaces we're a part of, the different people we're working with, the lack of understanding, the lack of representation. And on top of that, being first generation college students, right? Our parents not having the resources from our schools that they needed to help us. So us just kind of like figuring it out on the internet, having to put ourselves out there and contact other people, and the people maybe not having the resources we needed. So it was very challenging. It was very difficult navigating that, especially when it came to financial aid for college. In my case, obviously because of DACA, but also being both of us from low-income households. So despite all of these barriers, despite all of these circumstances, the lack of representation, the challenges that existed, we succeeded in school in spite of the systemic barriers that exist for Latinx students. Thanks to what some of the things we found are families' unconditional love and support, the resiliency, right? Obviously, like the fact that our families came from different countries, came here and like established themselves, that in itself is proof of resiliency, and that is inspiring to us as children of those parents who decided to make that difficult decision, and really paving the way for us to make our own journeys here in the United States. So that support, that community, those values really propelled us to find success and define success for our own selves and what that meant for us.
Thanks, Jose. So this really kind of, we share these realities that we experience to really kind of give you even more perspective on our values as an organization and why we feel so strongly about these values, and also encourage you to reflect on them too for yourself if you share the value, you know, and thinking about where that's coming from for you. And then also if there's resistance around a value, where that, reflecting on where that's coming from as well. So to start off with, we believe that education is a human right. Whether you're born in this country or not, regardless, you deserve access to quality education. And so that is a really fundamental belief that we have as we approach our work with working with all students from all different backgrounds, and specifically when it comes to immigration status in particular. That is something that we are also centering in our work and making sure that all of our Latinx identifying students have access to these resources. Next is the system is the problem and we have the power to change it. This is a really important one because so often our community has been posited as the problem, that we are the ones who will say just things that we've heard growing up, don't speak English or don't have the resources, that is all quote unquote our fault, but when really the system has not been designed with us in mind at all. And so that's something that we acknowledge, but at the same time, acknowledge the power that we all have as a community to really change this system. And so that is part of where we're driving our work. And this also ties into this next one, is that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So when we think about representation, maybe you're thinking about your school leadership, maybe you're thinking about school boards, whoever is making decisions in particular about challenges that our communities are facing, who actually has a seat at the table, who is part of that decision-making process. And so often the challenges that our community is facing, we often don't have a seat in those conversations or a seat at the table to really make intentional choices that are really going to benefit our community. So we really put forth this belief here that those who are the closest to the problems are the closest to the solutions, and that we need a seat at the decision-making table. Next, you'll hear us say this a lot. This is one of I think the values this is really manifesting in this presentation when we talk about nurturing identity formation in particular, but is that our identities and our experiences are our strengths. Sometimes they have been portrayed or pivoted back to us as weaknesses or this, and so often if we're thinking about it through that deficit lens, that's what's going to manifest. But so often our identities and the journeys that we've taken have also become our greatest assets, and they have built our resiliency like Jose was talking about. And so we'll unpack that more in our presentation. Next, firmly believe in embracing hope and joy. This is a really important part of this journey of nurturing Latinx identity formation. And as we think about times where, whether it's in school or society, that the Latinx community has been portrayed in a negative light in particular, it's challenging to find the moments in the narrative where they're really celebrating our joy and our hope and our dreams. And so this is something that we also challenge in our own work, and also others, to really also embrace the hope and joy of our community, as we are complex. And those recognitions and essentially those parts of who we are also need to be celebrated and amplified. Last but not least, this is going to set us up for explaining one of our programs in particular, but is a phrase that is soy de aquí y soy de allá, which translates to we are from here and we are from there. The opposite of this phrase would be ni de aquí y ni de allá. And that feeling of like not being from here and not being from there is something that really resonates with how I grew up, and feeling like I wasn't fully part of Waxhaw, North Carolina, but I also wasn't fully from Peru in many ways, not having grown up there. And so kind of living in this like very weird space of not feeling like I'm belonging to each space. And so for us, we really are challenging that notion, also trying to create spaces that really flip that on its head and embrace the fact that, yes, we are from here and we are from there. Soy de aquí y soy de allá. And that is something that we constantly aspire to, and also aspire that our students are feeling this way, and that they feel like we are part of North Carolina's community and part of this fabric that we have here. So hashtag Somos Carolina, and I'm gonna turn it over, dun. I think my clicker's working, to José to talk a little bit about Somos Carolina and kind of one of the initiatives that we're producing under Latinx Ed that is aiming to create this kind of space for students.
All right, thank you, Elaine. So with Somos Carolina, like Elaine said, it's one of our main programs working directly with immigrant families and their students. It's a leadership and identity development program. It spans 5 years from middle school to high school. Right now, we're working in Lee County and Orange County. So the purpose of this program is to foster positive racial ethnic identity, self-efficacy, and a support network for our students so that they become scholars and civic leaders in their communities. And again, we're reimagining and redesigning inclusive learning environments for Southern Latinx students. So I want to give you a preview of what that is. So our first cohort was actually part of the first summer experience last summer. Unfortunately, we had to cancel it this summer because of COVID. But what you'll see is sort of a small clip of the experience that we had for our students during that summer last year. What happened there? Here we go.
Somos Carolina is an educational opportunity for Latinx students to explore who they are, where they come from, and also think about where they're going in their future. We're focusing on personal narrative at this stage, and students are exploring their history, their family history, things that they love about their culture, and exploring how they can tie that into how they learn in the classroom, but also how they connect to leadership.
When we're in a class, it's not really like school. It's more like a discussion where your opinion is valid.
We're excited to be able to provide this opportunity to students to be able to explore who they are, reflect on their family, and it's been really meaningful to see them walk away being so proud.
Coming to Somos Carolina, it really hasn't changed my identity, but I've thought of it a lot more than before I came here.
I think what sets our program apart is that our leadership, our instructors are coming from the space. We're from North Carolina, have been raised in North Carolina.
I feel that I am affirmed and that this work is really needed. There's a lot of work to be done in this community, so I hope that there will be a bigger impact in the future.
Having a strong focus on culture, on community, and building that support network for them is eventually leading them to this path towards college that will eventually be able to help them fulfill their purpose.
I think Somos Carolina made me a more diverse person, a more proud person.
Somos Carolina is fun, inspiring, and educational. It is probably one of the best programs we could be at.
I would absolutely come back here next year if I got the opportunity to. Somos Carolina makes me feel proud of being Latina.
Somos Carolina is my family.
Elaine, I think you're muted.
Thank you so much. I was just talking to myself, having a great time. Okay, but thank you for sharing that video, Jose. This is our work with Somos Carolina is been such a powerful journey, especially these past 2 years. It's been a kind of reimagining, like I said, like the spaces that what this could look like for Latinx students, and be able to then build evidence-based practices that we're going to be able to recommend to whether it's schools, to educators, to school counselors, etc., on ways to really engage and nurture Latinx identity in the learning space. So as we keep going, this quote next, let me see if my clicker will work. There we go. It comes back to really this idea that our lived experiences and this belief that our lived experiences shape our identities and who we are. And it's really important to recognize these as our strengths and not as our weaknesses. And so as we want to either introduce, or maybe you're already familiar with this model, in particular community cultural wealth, and kind of break down what it is, but also how we're doing it in our practice in ways that we're evolving. We're also, also coming at you from a very humble space too. This is like also we're learners in all of this, and so we're constantly learning and evolving in our own work as well. And so we're excited to share with you ways that we have been able to kind of make headway on, and really ultimately recommend some practices too for you to consider in your work. But we'll go ahead and start off with explaining this model of community and cultural wealth. So this is an asset-based model or framework that was developed by a scholar, José in particular. And what she's arguing for here is that we need a framework to look at the types of community cultural wealth and the gifts and the knowledge that primarily students of color are bringing to educational institutions, so that we can recognize those gifts and what they are, and then also how ways that we can leverage them to continue improving their experiences in schools and getting through high school and attending college, etc. So this is, we're going to break down all these different types of capital, but this is really just the fundamental belief, right, that students are already entering our spaces, already possessing cultural wealth. And so it's up to us to really be able to nurture that, to tap into that. And we also feel like this is fundamental to the nurturing process too of Latinx identity, already acknowledging that students have so much wealth and so many resources, and so in the sense of their gifts, their talents, their community, their families. And so we're going to go ahead and break it down for you, but also excited to share some of the recommendations that we have from what we've already been doing. And so I'll turn over to Jose to start with familial capital.
All right, so the first one, familial capital, it's thinking about what we bring based on the important people in our lives, those who might have the strongest bonds with us, our family members, particularly maybe parents, other caregivers, aunts, uncles, grandparents. And so some of the recommendations, including caregivers in the learning process, I think that's something we learned early on last summer, whenever we had activities or certain assignments where students were required to go home and maybe talk about a certain topic with their parents or whoever was at home with them, including them in that process, making them feel part of their student's education just by simply including them in a short homework assignment or a quick check-in with their student regarding a topic discussed in class. Number two is creating opportunities for engagement with the caregivers and students, whether it's a workshop, maybe it's a get-together potluck type of event, including them in those events, making them feel part of your community is super, super important, and uplifting the caregivers as resources to students. So again, thinking about the worth, the wealth that they bring already to the table, just based on their experiences, their journeys, their histories, what they've learned maybe in their home countries. Those are all resources our students can tap into whenever they're thinking about their schooling and their experiences in school learning.
Absolutely. And I'll add one extra thing is that our students loved any opportunity to talk to their parents or their caregiver about what we were doing. And they just loved building those relationships with them. And I think sometimes there's that assumption that students are kind of being like, I'm too cool for my parents right now. And while that might be a reality for some, I think what we found was the majority of our students were really hungry for those connections. And so creating opportunity for that, like Jose is talking about, was pivotal. The next capital is navigational capital. So skills and attributes students bring to navigate resiliently through systems that were created without them in mind. And so in particular, as we break down, and I'm just thinking about our own experiences that we've kind of shared with you and how we've navigated even the education system, but it's just acknowledging for those on the call too, that we have power in this process, right? And acknowledging where those powers and the roles that we carry, where they lie, right? So using our powers to essentially recreate, maybe it's a process or a system that ultimately will center your students' need, and thinking about that as, and really empowering ourselves that we have those choices and we can make those choices. The next one is amplifying the genius ways that your students have figured out how to navigate the educational system. I mean, this is something that needs to be also uplifted at the same time, that our students are just so often just overcoming hurdles that some people can't even imagine, and so being able to help students even identify that capital for themselves and saying, look at all the ways that you are truly magical in this journey, and be able to help students kind of point that out, and then also amplifying it so other students can also recognize what that looks like. And last but not least, cultivating a growth mindset to help students evolve in their roles as learners and leaders. And so this one I could talk about forever, but I'm going to break it down. So ultimately, I think it's really important for us to also think about how we're evolving in our own roles to be able to mirror that for students. And if I think back to my journey being an immigrant in the US and kind of navigating what that experience was like, there were so many times that I was in a mode of survival, of just trying to make it through, trying to make it out for my family, that there was times where my self-worth got really wrapped up into my role as a learner in particular, and just trying to be the best student I could be. And then if I was ever receiving anything less, then, great. I was really kind of it was taking a toll on my self-esteem, and because I had really wrapped up my self-worth into that role, where that role is somewhere where I'm supposed to actually be making mistakes. I'm supposed to, because that's part of the learning process, right? And so that was something I had to work really hard to release for myself. And I think there's ways that we can do this for ourselves too, because this is a challenge that a lot of adults also have, right? Is trying to figure out what's the difference between who we are and the roles we play, and allowing ourselves to really be putting our self-worth and just inherently knowing our worth. And that's just step one, right? And so for us, this is just a piece of encouragement too, as we're on that journey. And we see that our students start to pick up those messages, and how we're creating and designing spaces for them to be able to make mistakes, for them to be able to make mistakes in their role as a learner, and saying, yeah, that's okay. That's part of the process, right? And really cultivating that growth mindset.
Our third capital we are looking at is social capital. When we think about this, we think about village building, creating this network of peers, social contacts that are committed to sharing information, community resources, emotional support, guidance for our students. And a lot of these, like we said, already exist within our communities, right? Churches, nonprofit organizations that work directly providing direct services. Some of those schools do a really great job of that. So what we're doing, I think, is expanding and interconnecting every party that we see involved in a community. Specifically in Lee County, we work with churches of different denominations. Actually, we work with a nonprofit. We're working directly with ESL services and the school directors and leaders. So it's bringing all of these people together and focusing on our students and what they need the most. One of the most important parts in building that network is striving to be relational before transactional. So that's important, because when you're thinking about who you're serving and why you're serving them, you have to create those connections, those relations with the people for the long term, especially, but also for the short term. You have to be able to know who you are as people, as leaders, as organizers, so that you value each other, you see your purpose, you see the connections to what you're doing and why they're important, and not just focusing on transactions of we need this, you need this, no, it's more than that. It's more that connection, that relationship, and also sustaining that long-term is important. And the second step is building your network with communities, partners, schools, to help bridge those gaps. Which is, I think, what I was mentioning earlier, where there existed all these different parties and organizations in Lee County, And sort of we've tried to bridge the gaps between all of them. Maybe maybe one organization wasn't aware of the other one, or maybe the different churches weren't communicating. But I think trying to build that network is the most important, because you're keeping in mind who's at the center, who's the focus of your work, which is the immigrant families, the Latinx students that you're working with directly in the community.
Did you talk about El Círculo? Did I miss that?
Oh, yes. So one of the most important steps I think we do is El Círculo, which is literally, it's a circle. So we do this in our meetings. We do this with our students. We try to incorporate it wherever we can. Basically, we're in a circle. We're sharing two important parts of our lives that are in that moment relevant. So a carga and a regalo. A carga is maybe something that's weighing you down. Regalo is like something great, something good that's going on in your life. So we do that with each other in our organization, right? It's building that relationship. It's acknowledging what we're going through, some of the hardships, but also building that community at the same time. We're being relational before we're being transactional with our students in the same way. We start off during our summer programming or during the school year, whenever they have workshops or meetings. It's that círculo that opens up every event for us.
Thanks, José. Awesome. So we're going to keep heading on to aspirational capital. So nurturing students' dreams and goals along with their resiliency to obtain them. And so as we're going to share a few different pieces, but I think one of this first one is really important, is that this is, I think aspirational capital it tends to resonate with a lot of educators and a lot of nonprofits and different types of educational initiatives. So I think one of the challenges here is to make sure that our students' dreams and goals are being centered, rather than trying to make them align with what we think their dreams and goals should be. So this is actually quite challenging sometimes in practice. So some of our recommendations here is validating the different paths to success and recognizing opportunities for students to explore what success could look like for them. So instead of saying, instead of conveying certain messages, like, for just to give in the college access role, like 4-year colleges are the only way, or that's the only option, or only pushing those kinds of opportunities, really starts to show some value statements at the same time of what organizations are defining as success. So for us, we've just found it really important to center our students' dreams and goals, and trying to be able to provide and show them all the breadth of options that are out here and opportunities that are out here to help them reach those goals and those dreams. And the next one is also real deep. Okay, this one is not for the faint of heart, and it also is like a forever going, process of evolution. But being really intentional, making sure that intentionality, that self-awareness, that our ownership over our choices and being present are really central parts of our pedagogy and our practice, and ultimately the culture that we're creating for students. And these pieces, which is also these are roots of conscious leadership in particular, but they are so fundamental, so important to helping students really connect to their dreams and to their goals, by helping them be intentional with the choices that they're making, helping them be more self-aware about who they are, and reflecting on what their passions are and what they think their purpose is going to be for their life, and then ultimately practicing being present. And those things are, on paper, it looks cute, it looks nice, and in practice it can be really challenging, because this is not, in my belief, this is not the way that our systems are really set up for us to be. And so this is really kind of pushing against that grain, but making sure that we are trying to practice this in our daily life and making this part of our routine, if you will.
All right, the next capital is linguistic capital. So with multiple languages and communication styles present in the communities we're working with all our children, with all the students, listening, sharing thoughts, feelings, ideas, it's important to recognize all those forms of expression and communication as valid. So our first recommendation involves ensuring that all the languages are welcome, right? Our students not only speak Spanish, not only speak English, some of them speak more than 2 languages, right? We have some students of indigenous roots who speak indigenous languages. So including and making sure that all of those languages are recognized, and that it's a safe space where they can express themselves in their preferred language. During an activity that we do called ABCs of Latinidad, it's kind of like a show and tell. So we start out with letter A and go through the ABCs, and students present on a topic or bring an item empanadas, for example, for letter E, and they express why that's important to them, explain maybe a little bit of the history, that connection to Latinidad, leadership, or learning. And that's, I think that's one of the ways we try to validate and recognize the different forms of expression and communication that our students have. Second recommendation is providing opportunities for different forms of expression within visual arts, written forms of expression, spoken word, recognizing that students maybe for a certain activity feel more comfortable writing, but for another activity they might feel more comfortable speaking. So allowing that space and that agency for our students is really, really important. And the third recommendation is to make sure that your environment and your resources mirror your community's needs, and that they get input in what those needs are and how you can best provide them. So a lot of it deals with getting feedback from the population you're working with, the community you're working with. We do bilingual surveys. We have our resources are bilingual as well. And so we try to meet that need, that language diversity that exists in our community. We try to mirror it as best as possible with our resources, our staff, the way we communicate with the community.
All right, so last but not least, resistance capital. So knowledge, skills, attitudes, and beliefs that strive to interrupt and dismantle stereotypes and assumptions. So this is just right. This is key, and this is goal to recognize in your students and to uplift in your students. And so some of our recommendations here, kind of shared a little bit about it before, but no history, no self. This can also be, we were talking in the chat, can be like NO, no history, no self. So that connection to who we are and understanding where we come from, it creates that clear vision of where we're going and where we're headed. So creating opportunities for students to connect with Latinx history, leaders, and traditions are just so it's so pivotal to be able to introduce that into a learning space in particular, and to consider that when you're thinking about examples or you're thinking about ways to connect students to content. Also protecting the potential of your students. This is what I feel like we're all have been how do you say, like, challenged to do this, right? Like, this is part of the calling. And so I think part of that also means that reflecting on ways that we're also honing our own resistance capital and standing up alongside our students to also interrupt and dismantle stereotypes and assumptions, to really also challenge the norm. And that in practice, again, is challenging, but so necessary as we nurture the resistance capital of our students, as well as thinking about how is this reflected in our own practice. And then last but not least, creating spaces for critical reflection and critical action. This is pivotal as we think about like why things are the way they are, and like what can we do to, thinking critically about what we can do to create positive change and transformation. And we also wanted to add the second piece to this recommendation, which is centering wellness and well-being, helping students also know in that process of critical reflection and critical action, how we can all center our wellness and well-being in that process. And so that has been a really key part of our work in thinking about how we're prioritizing ourselves also in that journey, and our wellness and the wellness of our community at large. And so we're going to, we've done a few different recommendations at large, and we're kind of wrapping up our session now, but I hope those recommendations that we're sharing felt tangible to you, felt ways that we could connect to the motto of community and cultural wealth. And so we kind of did a little bit of a summary here, and I'm gonna let Jose kind of start us off with just some of the top main, if you will, recommendations that you can kind of take from our work.
Yeah, with the first one, creating opportunities for Latinx students to share their culture and learning spaces. I think this can relate to any content area, any type of class. Elaine mentioned there was a writing assignment she did one time where she had to create a recipe. And so bringing in one of her mom's recipes into that was really, really cool and really important, and validating of who she was as a student in that space. Getting to know your Latinx students' personal history and experiences. I think the more you understand your students, the better you'll be able to teach them, the better you'll be able to engage them with whatever programs or activities you're doing, and allowing them to share that in that space is really, really important, to feel that validation, that acceptance, that sense of belonging that I think a lot of our students are trying to figure out or lacking in their spaces where they're learning. So providing them that space, I think, can be revolutionary for their learning experience.
So our next piece here of thinking about ways that we can validate student experiences and identities as valuable strengths. And I feel like this is, I saw a comment in the chat that not all teachers are open to this, and that's just such a real reality that I think we have to name, and also think of ways to challenge, and also challenge our leadership too, because in many ways the leadership can be the tone setting, right, of a culture in our community, of the things and the practices that we are deciding to do, whether that's in an institution like a school, to an organization, you name it, right? I think in many ways the leadership gets to set that tone. And so it's really coming, I think in many ways, challenging our leadership is if it's not happening, on ways that we need to do better as a community and work together to really make it happen. So, but continuing that lane of validating our students' experiences and their identities as valuable strengths, and making sure that that is, those are seen as gifts and talents. And then this piece here of also allowing students to, Latinx students, to make mistakes and also grow in their roles as leaders and learners. And I kind of shared a little bit about why that's really important, but this is at the root of every curriculum, right? And I think these pieces are things that should be in everyone's toolkit, and thinking about ways that you're really creating and facilitating space and facilitating dialogue and creating curriculum. And so these are ways that I think we have really been able to build positive relationships with our students, build a community where they feel like they're welcomed and they're included, and also trying to make, like, they're like, can we make this like the whole year of school? Like, they're really craving to be seen and to be heard. And to be valued. And so, and when you taste that kind of experience, or when you have that kind of experience where you do feel like that, truly, it's hard to go back. It's really hard to think about other ways. So we are also trying to equip our students at the same time with ways to also navigate those hardships, and to think about ways that we can really build our community, our village, to be able to continue navigating, but also challenging at the same time in a way that prioritizes our wellness, and create change in our schools and our community in the ways, in the pockets that we have also control and power to do so. So that was a lot of us talking at you, and I hope that some of what we're sharing resonates with you. So we have a question for reflection, which is just thinking about these different capitals, right? Maybe this is not new for you. Maybe this is something you're familiar with. So our questions are, as it relates to nurturing Latinx identity formation, which forms of cultural capital are being recognized, maybe by your programs or by your institution? And then also thinking about where are the gaps, because we all have room for growth, right? And so thinking about where we can and you can evolve is part of this challenge. And so if you have any thoughts or reflection, we'd love to hear them in the chat, or any comments. It could be open-ended as well, but if you have things to share about this, we'd love to know and learn from you as well. And so thank you again. I know we're getting close to time, so our last slide just has our contact information, but any thoughts as you're thinking, keep typing, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll love to see them. And I'll just go ahead to our last slide here, which is, thank you so much again for attending our session. We are essentially sharing with you a lot of the growth that we've been experiencing as a relatively new nonprofit too, but we've just had so much growth in these past 2 years. And so we'd love to connect with you and think about ways that, we can either further our work or, continue to support each other. So we have our website here. Also, we're at Latinx Education on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. So please follow us. We'd love to keep you in our network. If you have questions for us, me or Jose, you see our contact information down there. Also would love to connect with you either via email, it could be LinkedIn, social media. We're super excited to build community. And last but not least, just a little shameless plug for a new initiative that we're actually launching on September 1st. So if you'd like to get more information about that, but it's actually in our lane of college access work. And so it's an initiative called College y Consejos, so college and advice, but that we're going to be offering an online community for specifically 11th and 12th graders that are figuring out how to navigate, especially applying to college in the time of COVID. So if you have students in your network that might be interested in joining, we'd love to include them. So feel free to reach out to us for more information. We'll make sure that you're on the list when those announcements go out. So thank you again for being here, for your thoughts and your feedback. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for this amazing presentation. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, rather, please place them in the chat for Elaine and Jose. I actually have a question already for you both regarding Linguistic Capital. They say, I'm wondering how many of your Somos Carolina students earn our state seal of biliteracy when they graduate from high school. Do you happen to know anything about that or that program?
I'm learning right now, but actually our students they start in middle school. So we still actually they're just starting their first year of high school. So that's something that we would definitely love to consider for them once and learn more about, to be honest. But that it is an exciting opportunity for them to be starting their first high school year now, having gone through the program, and are going to continue in chapter-based kind of model for the high school. And so going to be in chapter cohorts as they navigate high school for the next 4 years.
Awesome, very cool. Sorry, I'm going to take over the screen for a second. I stole that from you right there.
No worries.
Perfect. Keep those questions coming in. I just wanted to make a note. I know a shameless plug for our programming, right? If you're interested in kind of, you know, correcting the errors of the no history, no self. At the UNC-DUKE Consortium, we have lots of resources about Latin America for teachers, lesson plans, curriculum materials, online curriculum materials, book sets that teachers can use in your curriculum. So please visit our website to learn more. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms that are given here. I also did want to let people know about tomorrow's sessions. I think some of y'all in particular might be interested in these. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. we have our arts-based practices for bilingual students. And then in the afternoon is a program that is very similar to what Elaine and Jose are working on. Is called Mariposas, developing a civic empowerment program for Latinx youth. Mariposas is a program that started as an after-school program in an elementary school and has since grown into a really great nonprofit in the Chapel Hill area. So I encourage everyone to attend both of those sessions tomorrow. If you would like a certificate of completion for CEUs, please go to go.unc.edu/Latinx Identity. I'll pop that in the chat as well, if I can figure it out. So that way you can get your CEUs for attending today's session. But if you have any questions for myself or Elaine or Jose, we're always happy to answer those questions. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you for the amazing presentation. I wish I could give you a standing ovation in person, but know that it's a virtual one. So thanks everyone for being here. And we hope to see you tomorrow as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you.
Thank you, everyone.
That is popping. Okay.
Yeah. Feel free to email us. I know a lot of you had questions or like possible connections to other meetings, so we're more than happy.
Thank you.
Thanks.